All right, so I've got 10:30, so I think we're going to get started on this. So thank you everybody for joining us on NSAR's Wednesday webinar for today. Today, as you will see, we are talking about unlocking the value in the center plan. So to that end, we have some guests from HRM with us. We have Waye Mason, who is the counselor for District 7. We have Stephanie Norman, who is a principal planner and development officer with Halifax's Land Development and Subdivision program. Stephanie's got 13 years of experience in administering Halifax's land use bylaws and recently has become the principal planner and development officer for the urban team, which has a primary focus on the regional center land use bylaws and development within the regional center. And then we have Kasia Tota, who is a principal planner with Halifax's community policy program. She's been with 18 years experience in regional and community land use planning, housing policy, public engagement, and urban design, and most recently worked on the center plan process. And we worked very closely on that process together over a number of years. She's a member of the Licensed Professional Planners Association of Nova Scotia and the Canadian Institute of Planners. So thank you for joining us today, folks, and I am going to turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. If I may, to staff, I'll just go very briefly and then hand it over to the people who actually know what they're talking about. So I'm going to, can I share my screen there, Paige? Oh, you're muted too.
Do you have that ability? You don't have that ability. Let me see if I can do
host disabled participant screen sharing.
Let me make you a co-host.
I am now a co-host.
There we go. You should be able to do it now. So we'll let Waye go. And if anybody has any questions while we're going through, feel free to pop them in the chat and we will have a Q&A at the end so that we can answer all your questions. And if you have any colleagues that have questions, we posted in the closed Facebook groups and they can post there and we will pose their questions for them. Go ahead, Waye.
Can everybody see that? PowerPoint?
Looks good.
Okay, good. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us today. We are talking about unlocking the value of the center plan, and staff are the experts on what is and is not allowed in land use planning in general. I think we're also going to have a little bit of a look forward, perhaps, into regional plan and suburban plan and how we want to replicate the center plan. The center plan was passed. I guess it was, it seems like forever ago, but I think it was just last fall. We passed package B. So center plan, it took about 6 years worth of work from start to finish. It was delayed about a year by COVID. The package A was all the kind of denser stuff, the building a taller building, a 30-story building on Wise Road or a 3 or 6-story building on Roby Street. That passed before COVID in 2019, and then we were delayed a year to get to parks, institutional, and established residential. And that established residential is a big piece of why I was talking to Paige with some other councillors a couple of months ago and suggested we should have this seminar and make some information available because while the focus has been on this, it's been on the big buildings and what are you allowed to build in downtown and what can you build on a corridor and what can you build in a higher order residential zone. We haven't spent a lot of time on the established residential, the houses and duplexes. So, when we focus on the regional center corridors and the higher density stuff, sometimes like the result we're seeing now because of the hot real estate market, I'm talking to realtors, you don't need me to tell you about the hot real estate market, but what we're seeing are things like this. This is a drone shot of the demolition at Roby and Binney. And while discomforting for folks and certainly happening way faster than any of us thought. Like I figured it would be a generation or two for the corridors to see significant change and build out in the center plan. What we're seeing because of the housing market being where it's at and all the different changes in the market, things are moving much more quickly than I think anybody anticipated. And you're reading about it in all Nova Scotia every week, another couple of houses or Gus's Pub being sold for redevelopment sometime in the next couple of years. So these houses have been torn down on Roby. And that is what we planned. We planned for intensification on main streets, on these corridors, and with HR and commercial, higher order residential residential and commercial. Centers on places like Winpool Road and Wise, Roby and Allman allow up to 30-story buildings by right. In this case, on what you're looking at right now, they can build an apartment building that's only 11 meters or 3 stories tall, but it can have a lot more density than you're going to get in those houses. So we anticipate that things like this will happen. We want the new design guidelines we believe will give us good results. It's not going to be all glass boxes with no features or whatever, but this is where we think density should happen. But we haven't talked a lot about this. This is the established residential zones. This is where you're allowed to build or continue to be able to build single family homes or duplexes or triplexes or townhouses, and backyard suites are now enabled everywhere in HRM. And so what I've been seeing are concerns because of center plan changing things about truth in advertising and real estate listings. And this is something I've been seeing increasingly in the last year as the market has exploded. Before a center plan was adopted, the way you got the right to build a tall building was you bought a bunch of land and you did a land assembly, and then you applied to council for a change in planning that might allow you to build a bigger building. Center plan changes all that. We no longer are really interested in having those discussions. We have said, this is where tall buildings can be built by right, Binney and Roby, and this is where you can't do that, and which is the established residential zones. So here's a listing that was the most recent one. And what's the big tell? Look in the living room window where you can see the futon bed pushed up against the living room window. And, I can say candidly, and it's a matter of public record because these things are open data, this house has been repeatedly investigated by compliance officers, and every room in it was being used as a bedroom for international students, and that's not legal. The listing for this house, which has a pending on it right now, says 2 bedrooms in a main unit, 4 bedrooms in a basement unit, and 3 bedrooms in a secondary unit. That's not possible. You can have 8 bedrooms in a maximum in the house in an ER2 zone. And so there's an issue with truth in advertising here. There was one over on Edward Street that was listed, one of those 3-unit apartments was listed for, almost, I think the initial listing was over $1.5 million, and it advertised 14 bedrooms. They had literally lost a court case over having too many bedrooms in that unit, in that building, and had been fined $16,000. So there are legal limits in the land use bylaw about how many bedrooms you can have in a zone. And I think it's really important that real estate agents, realtors become familiar with those rules. And so staff are going to talk about it a little more, but in the center plan land use bylaw, you have, this is the technical thing that's on page 67, and it's section 57 of the bylaw, and it says how many bedrooms you can have per unit or whatever. And I boiled that down to this. And I hope I got it right, and Kasia and staff can tell me if I got it wrong, but I'm pretty sure I got it right. In the ER1 zone, which is pretty much just down like south of Dalhousie and west of Roby, you can have 1 unit and 1 suite. And because you can only have 1 unit and a suite, that means your max bedrooms are 6 bedrooms, unless you have a backyard suite separate from the building, then it's 7 bedrooms. And in ER2, you can have 2 units plus a suite, which means your max bedrooms are 8 bedrooms, unless you have a backyard suite separate from the building, that's 9. And in ER3, it's 3 units plus a suite, max bedrooms of 10. And unless it's a backyard suite, there's 11. So one of the big changes that makes it better for realtors and makes it better for residents with this is, anyone who's been around an old hand on this knows that in the old R1 and R2 rules, how many units you could have and how many bedrooms you could have was determined by the size of the lot or the foot of frontage or how old your building was and all those things. Buildings that hadn't changed since 1951 had more rights than a building built yesterday. We've gotten rid of all that. These are the rules now. Unless it's grandfathered under the old rules because it had a renovation, anything new or existing in ER1 is 1 + 1. ER2 is 2 + 1, ER3 is 3 + 1. It makes it a lot easier. Now, the max bedrooms only applies that way if you have the max units. If you have fewer units, you have fewer bedrooms. But if you have 1 unit in an ER3, you have 6 bedrooms, just like 1 unit in an ER1. It doesn't change from unit to unit. So this list here, this is very useful and simplifies things tremendously. And we really want to get that message out, because it's really important that if you sell somebody a house on Roby Street or on Coburg, they know they have development rights that are substantial. But if you sell them one on Garden Street or on Dalhousie Street or on, in the Hyderstone, they have different rights. They have these, more constrained rights. And it's important that they know that. So that's it for me. Let's turn it over to staff and they can stop share. There you go. Handed it over. And hopefully they can pick it up from there.
Thanks, Waye.
Okay, thanks for this. Councillor Mason knows the plan really, really well. So right into the details. So he's been with us along this journey. We have a couple of slides with Stephanie as well, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions. And I'll try to go through things fairly quickly, but happy to answer questions. So yeah, I guess we're here really to share a little bit more of the detail of Centre Plan, the purpose, how it works, and hopefully invite everyone to get another big documents, but we think they're organized really well. And I think once you get to know them a little bit more, you can easily find what you're looking for. We often get calls from realtors, well, what's permitted and where? How do I find the right zone? Or, how many units can I have? So we are happy to answer those questions, but we're hoping that after today, you'll be more comfortable digging into those documents and maps as well. So we really are focused here on the low density residential, but also touch a little bit on the mixed use zones, and also talk a little bit about the permitting and how to find things online, how the online tools work as well, which I think can be very helpful to you and your clients. I think Waye already covered this. So Centre Plan Package B was approved just this past fall in October. It's the first phase of the plan and bylaw simplification program for HRM, where we want to shrink the number of plans and land use bylaws from the unwieldy 20, I think it's like 22 right now still, to perhaps 3, the center, the suburban areas, and the rural areas. So we know that many of the plans are outdated and we need new rules, just the way we were able to do so in the regional center. And the key changes are, again, moving from discretionary approvals to more as of right. So if you meet the land use bylaw, chances are you can get a permit within a few weeks and not years. And that's a big game-changing move that Centre Plan has implemented. There's definitely more support for more housing options in all your areas of regional center, and more support for mixed-use developments, in particular along transit routes. So those that are existing or those that are planned, like the BRT routes, we want to put density where there is good transit and good services. So that's the Centre Plan in a nutshell. So there are basically 2 documents. So we have the plan, which we call the secondary municipal planning strategy, which is a mouthful. And that's the policy document that really sets out the vision and the key policies that set direction to the land use bylaw. And there is also some policies that enable some discretionary approvals and rezonings and development agreements, but those are quite limited related to heritage sites or large sites that can have a little more flexibility, but essentially this is as much as possible an as of right plan. There's also an urban design manual that is guiding the plan, in particular larger sites. And there are many maps. There are over 20 maps in the plan that also are part of the policy. The land use bylaw, on the other hand, is a detailed document. We can't regulate just from policy. So that's why the level of detail that's in the plan. And it is a form, we call it a form-based plan and land use bylaw, hence a lot of detail around urban design and build form and heights, which are, heights are actually embedded in the plan, so they're really difficult to change. And the land use bylaw sets out all the different zones, special areas, and detailed build form and design requirements. And it also comes with a number of schedules. They're basically maps as well, but to distinguish them from the policy document, we call them schedules because they're part of the regulations. So your zoning schedule, your height schedule, minimum setbacks, pedestrian area, commercial streets, all of those are shown in maps in the plan. And there's also many tables that actually help you understand the regulations quite easily. And there are actually also diagrams in the land use bylaw as well that help illustrate some of the key concepts. What's your front yard? What is your flanking yard? There's many illustrations. So we really, I think, worked quite hard to organize the bylaw quite differently from before and to support users. Waye is probably tired of seeing this plan, but I still like to show it because essentially center plan, this is center plan in a nutshell. It is about building complete communities. It's about building streets for people, for pedestrians, and also strategic growth. So while we are enabling a lot of growth, we are strategic. It's not indiscriminatory. As Waye said, we want more growth in centers and corridors and more of an infill development in low density neighborhoods. Just trying to shrink this. Don't know if this is blocking the. The plan has what we call the urban structure map. So these are your general organizations of the land use designations. So from downtown, centers, corridors. The yellow are the established residential areas. So a lot of center plan is still covered by low density neighborhoods with similar zoning, and the kind of darker purple areas are future growth nodes. So the key moves is definitely about enabling a lot more growth. So we're estimating about almost 40,000 units under mixed use zoning, 12,000 units in future growth nodes. So these are the brand new neighborhoods that we are planning, such as Penhorn and Southdale and Shannon Park, for example, and they have detailed policies. And there's more units that may be possible, again, for those that have to go through more detailed planning process. And it is really about creating more certainty about what is permitted and where, and really limiting the whole discretionary process to really more of a special situations. And I think we've come, the plan was approved at the right time. Perhaps should it be improved? Would have been nice if it was approved a little bit quicker, but we've, as everybody knows, we've been growing quite quickly, and things are happening faster than we even thought 2 years ago. And our population is shifting. Typically, we had, in the last census, we had about 25% of the population living in the regional center, which is, within 10 minutes of our downtown. And now we're almost up to 34%. With the percentages, shrinking a little bit in the suburban areas and the rural areas. I know Paige was interested in seeing some information about permits. And again, the red line on the left-hand side illustrates residential units being approved in the regional center. And they've been, at about 500 units in 2010, and now we're at 2,000 units. On average, and definitely catching up to the suburban growth, which is the blue line. And overall, last year we approved over 5,000 new residential units, and these are the construction permits, which are worth over $1.6 billion in construction value. Again, just in the first 3 months of this year, we've approved almost 1,000 units, which the numbers are quite similar to 2021. But again, at this time, they're a little bit higher in the regional center than they were last year. And from September to March, we approved over 3,000 units as well. Okay, so just a bit of introduction, but so how does the center plan work? So of course, the schedules are a very important part of the plan, and Schedule 2 is a very important one. This is the schedule that shows you zones, and we have this as an interactive map as well, where you can search your address or PID and find out very quickly what zone you are, what zone you're in. The next really important part of the land use bylaw is the bylaws are organized into different sections, for administration, where do you need to get permit, what may be exempt, various rules about what's needed for permits. But then the land use and the zones section is very important. So there's tables 1A to 1D, organize the zones by type. So the table 1B, for example, is the one pertaining to the established residential areas. So, and the zones are organized by number. So ER3 is the most intense zone, ER2 is a bit less so, and ER1 is the more single unit type of dwelling zone with extra secondary suite or backyard suite. We also have two cluster housing zones, which are brand new to the plan, the CH2 and CH1 zones. So these tables, I think, should be your friends. It's a very easy way to find out what's permitted in each zone by type of use. So for example, in this example, the residential section lists all the kind of all of the types of permitted residential uses in the plan. So from single unit dwellings to all the way to cluster housing, shared housing. And if you have a black dot in your zone, means it is permitted. If it is empty, it is not permitted. And if there is a number, a circle with a number, it means there's a footnote in a table that may have some special conditions or limitations on the use. It's still permitted, but there may be some additional limitations. So that's a very easy way to see what residential uses, commercial, institutional, other uses are permitted in the zone. And I think that's a really great reference. In addition, as we mentioned, there is under land use section about, there are some specific additional regulations. So for residential uses, there are additional rules. So for example, the bedroom counts or rules around shared housing, backyard suites or secondary suites. So there's additional detail that you still have to be aware of, but this is a quick reference. So again, Schedule 2, I think we'll probably send the presentation around. So there's a link to Schedule 2, and there's also a link to the interactive map where you can search your address and the zone. And the interactive map actually gives you some of the key information. So for example, not only your zone, but it can tell you whether there's a special area that applies to your property as well, which can have additional kind of specific rules to your property. It'll give you a maximum height or floor area ratio permitted on a property. Also, whether you are in a proposed or existing heritage district. So these are all kind of really useful cues to let you know what may apply to your property. Again, this is just, I think I already covered it, but the black circle means a yes, no circle is a no, and if there is a number, there are some specific rules around, what may be permitted and where. So moving on to the established residential designation. So what is new and what is gone? So what is gone are the R1, R2 zones that I know have been very familiar with, which were typically the two types of zones in those low density neighborhoods. Although they were very different, Dartmouth than they were in Halifax or in the Halifax mainland. So this plan streamlines it. It makes ER1 zone very similar, across the regional center. GFAR controls are gone, as well as parking requirements. In the low density residential areas, there are no minimum parking requirements, limits or separation. There's different rules around shared housing. There are consistent shared housing rules in all of the established residential zones, and shared housing is permitted at different scales in all the zones. And many of the internal conversions that we are familiar with linked to a particular date to 1986, so on and so forth. So many of those special rules are gone. There are some conversions that are permitted, which we'll speak to in a bit, but essentially there's the new ER and CH zone, cluster housing zones are in the plan. There's a maximum height applied in all areas. For example, Dartmouth never had maximum height in those low density areas, and now that there's consistent, typically 11-meter maximum height in all of the established residential neighborhoods, except maybe if you are a registered heritage property, then it's a little bit lower. The reduced and consistent lot and build from requirements. Secondary suites and backyard suites are of course permitted, as well as shared housing. And in ER3 zone, we also have permissions for townhouses and also internal conversions within existing units up to 6 units. So this is only for the ER3 zone, but internal conversions for those larger homes is also enabled. So again, the graphic here, I think as Waye as Councillor Mason has indicated, there are the ER1 zone is still about the essentially detached homes, but then the ER2 zone permits more broadly duplexes and triplexes in some cases if you add the secondary suite or backyard suite. Townhouses, we also have heritage conversions, so heritage development agreements can be applied to all registered properties, as well as buildings in the ER3 zone, and the smaller lot sizes and frontage requirements can also allow for some lot subdivision and some infill in those neighborhoods. So I think that's a bit of a summary of the ER zone. And in the cluster housing zone, the CH1 zone can promote multiple buildings on the same lot. So this is, for example, tiny home developments, and the CH2 zone is on existing mobile homes, home parks. So those are, I think, really innovative zones that can again provide for some additional, co-housing options or land use communities in the regional center, which is pretty exciting. So in addition to the zones, there are 9 special areas, because when you think about from Yonge Avenue to Little Grand Street, where they have, you have very large zone lots or very tiny ones. So these special areas, again, try to tailor the regulations, particularly lot sizes, frontages, setbacks, to the character of those neighborhoods. So we're not losing the characters of various areas, but we do it through special area regulations. So the uses are the same, but the build from requirements may be a little bit different. Again, a secondary suites, we get a lot of questions about secondary suites. So basically any lot in the ER designation can have a secondary suite in conjunction with a single unit dwelling, 2-unit dwelling, a semi-detached dwelling, 3-unit dwelling, and also a townhouse. That's typically a townhouse on its own lot, and that has a street access. So it may not be perhaps every townhouse, but if you have street access, you can. You also cannot have both a secondary suite and a backyard suite. So you have to choose one, and there's a maximum floor area of 80 square meters on the secondary suite. And the bedrooms in the secondary suite are counted towards this maximum bedroom count. So as Councillor Mason indicated, typically for a single unit dwelling, six bedrooms, and the secondary suite will be counted towards that. Backyard suites, again, they're also permitted in everything from single unit dwellings to townhouse dwellings on their own lots. In this case, bedrooms are not counted towards the maximum bedroom count. So you could have an extra bedroom beyond the 6, for example. It must be located in the rear yard. It must also have an obstructed street access. The maximum size is 60 square meters and the maximum height is 5.5 meters. So these are the kind of typical rules for backyard suites. And there's no additional parking, but of course, connection to services would still be, will still be required from Halifax Water. And yeah, this is just new kind of update on the permits. So in 2020, before the regulations came in force, we had maybe 7 permits across HRM for secondary backyard suites, and now In 2021, it's over 140. So there's definitely increased interest, which is exciting to see. So we just wanted to highlight some of the key aspects of the ER zones. But again, the land use section of the land use bylaw provides more detail, and also each of the special areas you have to kind of pay attention to those requirements because they may be different in different areas. So mixed use zones, again, does include the downtowns. So downtown Dartmouth, DD zone is downtown Dartmouth, and the DH zone is the downtown Halifax zone. Centers, we have the CEN 2 and CEN 1 zone. The corridors only have one, the corridor zone, and high residential. So these are largely residential multi-unit neighborhoods. HR2 zone is more permissive again than HR1 zone. And then we have 2 future growth node zones as well. So CDD2 and CDD1, and they all have different permissions. So not spending a lot of time on that, but just to highlight around, the housing policies are increased opportunities for housing. We do require a mix of unit types in higher density development. So anything over 40 units has a unit mix requirement. Typically 25% of 2-bedroom units. And in HR zones, there's also 5% requirement for 3-bedroom units. There's broad permissions for shared housing for work-live units, home occupations, as well as some offices. And of course, we talk about the secondary suites. The mixed-use zones also have a requirement for bonus zoning, where 60% of the contribution has go towards affordable housing as money in lieu, and we now have an affordable housing reserve that's being used to fund nonprofit housing projects, which we're very, very happy about. And there's also a number of other partnerships that the policy speak to, and we are already implementing as a municipality to address fair use affordable housing needs. I want to briefly talk about culture and heritage because it also impacts development rights and within established residential neighborhoods as well. So as many of you know, we have about 10 proposed new heritage conservation districts. So these are areas with more detailed heritage regulations where the focus is to preserve heritage properties and to reward conservation as well, sometimes through higher development rights. So there is one of the few discretionary options is the development agreement option for registered properties, which can allow you for additional uses, as well as higher density than the plan describes. Is one of the few places where you can exceed the maximum height or FAR permitted in the plan. The bonus zoning also applies to on-site heritage conservation. And if you are a heritage building, or if you actually are next to a registered heritage building, there are maybe additional design requirements that may come into play as well and affect the property. We also have a landmark building provisions. So these are not registered heritage buildings, but there may be perhaps churches in established residential neighborhoods. And we do have provisions in the land use bylaw and in policy to allow for internal conversions to residential and some commercial uses. If the building essentially stays the same, there's some 20% expansion allowances, but if the building is preserved, then you can convert it to other uses. So that's also another, I think, would be good to know policy. So what else do you need to know? So we do apply floor area ratio or FAR requirement, which are very easy to calculate to see what's permitted, but this is only applied within centers and the downtown Dartmouth zones. And there's also an overall maximum height of 90 meters in those areas. Everywhere else, maximum height applies. There's also transition to low-rise neighborhoods. So perhaps when you're talking to property owners, you know, what's going to be built next to me if you are, you know, perhaps backing onto a corridor, and there are provisions to have 6-meter separation between the corridors and the low density neighborhoods, and there are also step backs and land use controls. So there wouldn't be perhaps, you know, just to reduce conflict between those adjacent uses and also to provide for some transition. We also have protected views. Taller buildings have to meet standards around wind and shadow. And we have a number of pedestrian-oriented commercial streets, such as College and Pimple, you know, Spring Garden Road, where the ground level has to have active commercial uses. And there's also a lot of very detailed site and landscape design provisions, which typically we would only have in development agreements, but they are now in the land use bylaw as well, and as well as the design requirements. I think that's it from me. So I'm going to turn it over now to Stephanie, who will talk more about implementation and permits.
Thank you, Kasia. So we have our development permit applications that are really popular, specifically now with the center plan. It's essentially a review against the land use bylaw. So typically people would submit an application with floor plans, site plan, and elevations, and we would review against the land use bylaw. Sometimes people make their real estate deals contingent on receiving one to ensure that they use bylaw before their property. They're very popular and constantly reviewing and issuing development. Site approvals, they were a requirement under Package A, but with Package B, they're only we only use them if somebody's proposing a variation. We're trying to encourage people to meet the land use bylaw as much as possible. So in the event that you need a variation, it's something that you could apply for a larger scale project. And there are certain criteria and certain aspects that can be varied. There are also discretionary approvals, which would be essentially a development agreement. In previous plans, it would be something that you would see a lot of, but with regional center, there are not that many opportunities for a development agreement, but it would be something for like an expansion of a commercial use or properties that are larger than a hectare or similar things to that. Council's approval is required with development agreements. The incentive in bonus zoning is a requirement that's linked up with the larger projects over 2,000 square meters. So if there's a proposal for a building that's 2,000 square meters or greater, then there's an equation within the bylaw that talks about square footage and money that's required for affordable housing as part of the permitting process. And the regional center plan also has additional flexibility for non-conforming uses and structures, whereas before we would be leaning completely on the HRM charter that was very, very specific. Regional center recognizes that there are a lot of existing buildings and lots, so it provides additional flexibility. The next slide, Kasia, please. Thank you. So I think Kasia had touched on this a little bit. A lot of this information is very readily available online. So on this website, our regional center plan area, you've got the MPS and the land use bylaw. I use this link and I open it in the morning. I use it all day. And it also, if you are on the website and you scroll down, it'll have all of the maps and all of the schedules that you can click on if you're looking for a specific piece of information. Next slide, Kasia, please. Thank you. And then this is the interactive map that Kasia also touched on. So it's very, very helpful. You can look up an address or a PID and it'll tell you what the zone is, and it'll link you to the land use bylaw as well, where you could find the table and look for the information about what uses are permitted on the lot and then what the requirements are for that particular use. And another big change that we've had within the planning group is our new online permitting system. So before, it was a lot of coming down to our office and making an application in person. Now you can make all of your permitting applications online, and that communication with staff is through the system, also through email and through phone. But you can upload your drawings here, and they'll be reviewed by the planners, engineering, and our building officials. And then essentially the permit is issued through this system as well. So it just makes it a little bit more streamlined. You can log on and see where you are in the process and communicate with the people who are reviewing it. So this was a big change for us. It's going well. And of course, like some people, they don't have computers and they are not comfortable applying this way. So for those who don't have a computer, they can come down to our office to make an application. And actually, this is a good opportunity to let everybody know that we have moved. Our two planning offices have consolidated, and we just moved a couple of weeks down to Duke Tower. So in the event that you're looking to have a question answered in person, or if you don't have a computer and you need to make the application in person, then you could come down to our office down on Duke Street. Right, so this is another slide that speaks to the online permitting. Essentially, the customer would prepare an application with the appropriate drawings, submit the application all online, and our process coordinators would look at it to make sure that it was complete. Our reviews would happen. So if it's just a development permit, then it would be the planners on the development side and engineering. And if it's a full building permit, then it would be planning, our planning group and our building officials. So the reviews would occur. Once it's ready to be issued, there'll be a final check, and then the permit would be issued, and then any inspections that are needed would be booked on there as well. Is that the last slide there, Kasia?
That's it. I'm trying to advance it. Sorry, don't know why it's stuck.
That's okay.
So, okay, there we go. That's it. We're done, I think.
Yeah, so I think we're available to answer any questions that people may have.
Great. So if anybody has any questions, you can pop them into the chat or into the Q&A there, and we will pose those. We have one question right now, and Tina is wondering how frequent is the online development map updated?
I think it's all the time, as needed.
As needed, whenever there's a change. So far, I think we haven't had any changes since council approved it, and we don't expect too many. There may be some minor housekeeping, but it is automatically updated as with approvals.
Yeah, the map that we're showing you, the zoning map, is not intended to be updated on a regular basis. That what we've done is you said, this is what you're allowed to build where. You can build this year and this year and this year. And there will be some changes, there always are. Like if a school closes and that institutional zoning needs to be rezoned or something like that, or a hospital needs to expand, those things happen. But generally, it's not going to change. I'm going to drop a link to that in the chat too, so folks can just explore that.
Fantastic. Tina is wondering, does the plan apply to other suburbs like Bedford, Sackville, etc.? No,
it doesn't. So it's really the peninsula and Dartmouth within the circumferential highway. So the suburban, that should be the next phase of the plan and bylaw simplification. It's looking at the suburban areas, but right now the Bedford plan still applies to Bedford.
As Kasia said at the beginning, the hope is to do a suburban plan and then a rural plan, or maybe both of those at the same time. And one of the things when we talk about bylaw simplification is anyone who's really looked into this, that each one of the old plans in the county in Bedford and Dartmouth have different definitions for the same thing. So if nothing else, at the end of the day, we're hoping that we have one set of definitions for the entirety of HRM, and that you would have a ER1, ER2, ER3 kind of model, probably a little different in the suburban area, but that's the work over the next 2 to 4 years.
Okay, I think that kind of speaks to our next question, but we'll ask it anyways. Wondering if the change in zoning terminology is across the board, all of HRM, or only what's shown in the center plan map there. I think you kind of addressed that way, is that we all have different terminologies depending on where we're at, and you're hoping to standardize those.
Yeah.
If you're outside of the center plan area, you're still under the old plans. Most of the plans have been amended but not replaced since amalgamation. The only two exceptions, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, staff, is the Dartmouth Main Street area and the kind of Joe Howe corridor in Fairview. You know, all of this needs to be brought out into the suburbs. And that's something we're hearing the suburban councillors want to see this kind of rationalization happen too.
Anybody else have any other questions? Please feel free to pop them in the Q&A. We have a captive audience here to answer your questions.
I can't figure out
questions.
I can't figure out how to post the link to the map since I'm a presenter now. So I'll just.
Well, if you want to email that to me, Way, we'll make
perfect.
sure that we include that for folks. I did have a question come in via email, and one of our members had noted that the approvals they're receiving for permits aren't as detailed as they used to be. And I'm wondering if anyone can speak to that.
I mean, sometimes our permits will have additional information or some conditions. It kind of depends on what the permit's for. They may have been simplified a little bit, but if that's the case, it would have been to take off information that wasn't relevant.
Okay, great. And if that folks, those folks who asked have a specific follow-up, I will reach out to you folks and let you know. We do have a question. How can you change a single family to a duplex? Is there a process for that?
If you're in a single family zone, the ER1 zone, the answer is you can't, unless you have a really good reason. Like if it's some kind of mistake was made during the center plan, or there's a compelling reason like for us to change it. But in an R2 zone, you just apply, and Stephanie can talk about that better because that's just, it's enabled by the bylaw.
Right. So if it is permitted, then we would be looking for a building permit application that we would review and presumably issue if it meets all of our requirements in the building code, and then the construction would happen to actually add that second unit.
All right. I don't see any popping up there. So thank you so much, folks, for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to explain the center plan and help folks kind of understand what that means for their business and for their clients, and a little bit of a look to the future as to what we can expect for planning and development in HRM and how we're moving forward. If anybody on the call, any members have any questions, feel free to send them to me, and I will do my best to get them along to the right expert and get your questions answered. But thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We appreciate you coming on and answering the questions, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Stephanie, Kasia, and Way. Have a great day.